Hello, I'm John Porter, the author of One Day as a Tiger, and I'm delighted that my book is now in Spanish. I've climbed since I was 13 years old, which means I've climbed for nearly 60 years now, give you some idea of my age. I was born and brought up in America, and I moved to England to go to university at Leeds when I was 20 years old, and I've been living in England ever since. The title of the book is Better to Live One Day as a Tiger Than a Lifetime as a Sheep. And that is an old Tibetan saying, and it's the saying that Alex McIntyre, Alex's mother, chose to put on his memorial stone, which I took out to Annapurna Base Camp and erected, and I went back and replaced it in 2013 as well, because it had been avalanched out. So I think what you learn from Alex is, well, maybe the old adage, the good die young, but he lived a fuller life than most people do, even though he died at 28. We climbed together a lot. He was my apprentice in university. He was a beginner climber, a bit of a bumbly, but within 10 years, he became a Himalayan master. And he was very intelligent. He was a great designer of equipment. He had fantastic ideas and a strong legal mind. He was killed by a single stone on Annapurna, and the book is about not only his life in the 10 years I climbed with him, but maybe what would have happened had he been alive, had he lived on. So 20 years after he died, I realized he was an important figure that needed to be, it was a story that needed to be told. And eventually I wrote the book, got up the courage and finished it in 2014. The first chapter I wrote about our trip to Afghanistan, probably 30 years ago. And it was like a little short story. And that kind of sat in the back of my mind, and I thought, well, maybe I'll use that someday. But actually, that first chapter that I wrote all those years ago is the first chapter in the book. And it's the kind of cornerstone of what follows. I'd had a bad accident and I'd snapped my quadricep tendon. So I thought for a year, I'm not going to be doing much climbing. I'll write the book. So I phoned Alex McIntyre, Alex's mum, who I had a very close relationship with. Jean always said to me before we went on an expedition, please look after my little boy and make sure that he comes back. But of course, as we climbed together over many years, he was no longer a little boy. He could look after himself and he became a great climber. But when I phoned Jean and said, I'm going to write this book, she said, can you wait for another year or two? Because I've just been diagnosed with cancer. And I don't want all the upset of reading about my dead son while I'm still alive. So I said, Jean, of course. Well, actually, she lived for another 8 years. I saw her quite a bit. And it was really only after she was released and had left that I had the authority, I felt, to finish the book. But also, I wanted to make sure it was right with his sister, Libby, and his girlfriend, Sarah. So I sent them parts of the book and said, look, I'm not going to complete this book unless I have your permission, because Sarah, you were his lover, and Libby, you were his sister, and with Alex McIntyre, you were the three most important women in his life. And they read what I was writing and said, you must finish this book. So I did. Wojtek Kurtyka was one of Alex's best friends as well. And Alex was very important to the Poles. His first major expedition to the Himalayas was with Wojtek Kurtyka and myself on Bandaka. The following year, we did the alpine-style ascent of the South Buttress of Changabang. That was in 1978, a route which has never been repeated because you need to use hammocks very high up. And then after those two climbs, Alex continued climbing with Wojtek. They did the east face of Dhaulagiri, which at the time was the first major Himalayan face to be climbed alpine-style. They had two visionary attempts on west face of Makalu. He did the south face of Shishapangma, alpine style, with Doug Scott and Roger Baxter Jones. So in 10 years, he achieve more than most climbers do in a lifetime. And so he was my best friend, and I realized it was a story which would just go up in smoke if somebody didn't write it. So I felt eventually I had to write it. And it was also a way to clear my brain of the sadness I had with his death. He was killed by a single stone falling on when we were attempting a new route on Annapurna. And I just had to tell the whole story. There were 3 of us attempting a new line on Annapurna, but when he was killed, he was with our friend René Gallini. They were high on the face, and they were stopped by a single rock barrier. I'd been sick, but as I saw them coming down, I thought, great, I'll be able to rejoin them because I was better. But on the way down, a single stone was like a sniper's bullet, just picked him off. Reinhold Messner described Alex as the purest of the Himalayan climbers of his age. There's a famous photograph of Alex meeting Reinhold with Jurek Kukuska and Wojtek Kurtyka, and that's when he said it to him. Because, you know, he said, Alex, you're the only person who's never been on a big expedition. You've always come to the Himalayas just as 1 or 2 or 4 people maximum. So maybe you're the purest. And that's the way Alex climbed. He saw that lightweight was the future of climbing, and he designed a lot of equipment which was extremely lightweight. He designed our hammocks for Changabang. He had a rucksack which weighed just ounces that he designed himself with Carrymore. All relevant for today, because I think a lot of his ideas and designs have come into the present day. There was something else about Alex. I think he had a vision of the future, which I didn't have. I remember sat on a new route on Hunchuli, looking out at some lights in the distance in Pokhara. And I said, gosh, look at that, Alex, there's electric lights out there. And he said, if you come back in 30 years, there'll be lights everywhere. And I said, why is that? Nobody's going to come here. It's subsistence farming. And he said, no, what you will find is the mountains will become a playground for many, many tourists. And this was before the internet. It was before mobile phones. It was at a time which we had no communications once we went into the mountains. And Alex and I had a discussion, and he said, you know, someday you'll be able to watch yourself on television in base camp. You'll be able to phone home and send pictures. And I said, Alex, don't be silly. Somehow he saw it all, and I didn't. And that's another reason why I had to tell the story, because, and I write about it. It's fantastic. That conversation on Hunchuli, he just explained to me what the future would look like in 30 years. There's a chapter which is about his relationship with his family and his mother. And yeah, there were times when I was close to tears writing it. But at the same time, I felt very energized because it all came back. Everything we talked about, everything we did together. He was a very funny character. He looked like a rock star. He looked like Mark Bolan. The girls used to swoon everywhere Alex went. He was a beautiful kid, and he just loved climbing. Wojtek Kurtyka said that Alex always kept him calm, because Wojtek is quite a nervous climber, but he said with Alex there was something deep and calm which calmed him down when they were climbing together. And I found that. Alex used to say, if you don't like being here, don't come. He just loved being in the mountains. Alex and Kurtyka were a very strong team together. They understood each other. There's some funny bits in the book where in the early climbs Alex was really just learning his skills, but when needed, as Wojtek described him, he was like the joker in the pack. He'd suddenly pull out some exceptional piece of climbing when we were wondering what to do, go left here, right there, and Alex would say, okay, I'll do this pitch. That was just his nature. He did his first route in the Alps with me. He'd lost one of his boots, so he had to go and hire some boots from Schnell Sports in Chamonix. So he had one boot which was 2 sizes too big, and I think he had 1 ice axe, and you know, so from there I thought, when I did this route with him, we nearly died because we got caught in a big storm on the Lipiny. And I thought, I'm never ever going to climb with this guy again. He's a complete bumbly. little did I know that, you know, in 10 years' time he would be seen as one of the great Himalayan climbers. Bandaka and Changabang, very different. We did them back to back, one in 77, one in 78, both with Wojtek Kurtika. Wojtek describes Bandaka as the great liberation in his climbing style, because he knew once we overcame the fear of climbing this mountain, he could call that back many expeditions after that to find the sort of calmness that we had when we eventually decided to go into the face. So yeah, I'd say Bandaka was the most important, even though not the most difficult. Changabang was extremely difficult. It was like climbing an alpine TD sup for 3 days, and then we had El Cap 5 days at very high elevation, all over 6,000 meters. So it was really interesting climbing. He was one of the first people who worked as a designer in the mountain trade. He worked for a guy called Mike Parsons at Carrymore. When most climbers kind of made stuff together in their backyard or in their garage, Mike Parsons saw that there was a market out there for well-designed equipment. And he took on Alex as a designer, because I sometimes think Alex loved lightweight because he hated to carry heavy rucksacks. So for him to have a chance to design lightweight equipment also meant he was going to have to carry less in the mountains. So he was a bit of a selfish interest. But he also, as Mike Parsons said, he understood that it wasn't just the selfish climbers who could use this equipment. Many other people would benefit with good design. A lot of outer jackets in those days were too heavy for the Himalayas. Anybody who's walked on a glacier in the Himalayan sun will know that you want to take all your clothes off. But in those days, you only had the one heavyweight outer kagul. So he designed very lightweight one-piece suits and light jackets, which were perfect for the moments when it was just too darn hot in the Himalayas. But at the same time, he used layering, so you always had other layers to put on. Very old-fashioned idea, but rather than one or two big bulky jackets, he was a fan and designed multi-layered equipment.